Now on the Business Radio X network, Conscious Capitalism, elevating humanity through business in Southern Arizona. Your hosts, Sarah McCraren and Jeremy Neese.
Southern Arizona does good business, and we want to talk about it. Welcome to the Conscious Capitalism radio show and podcast, streaming live and on demand from the Tucson Business Radio X studio. Conscious Capitalism is an international movement promoting business as a force for good. The Conscious Capitalism movement has 50-plus chapters in the United States and internationally, including Arizona, with a lot of activity down in the southern part of the state. We are bringing people together to make it easier for Southern Arizona businesses to do good business and to partner with organizations who know successful companies value all of their stakeholders, including the communities in which they operate.
On this show, we want to shine a light on real-world examples of good business happening right in our own backyards. We invite leaders in our community to share their stories and experiences, to tell us about their personal journey through the world of business, to let us know what makes their organizations great, and how they go about bringing value to Southern Arizona. If you would like to learn more about Conscious Capitalism and the community of people forming around it, please visit consciouscapitalismaz.com to learn more, or reach out to Sarah and I. So let's get into some good business and introduce you to the voices who will be participating in today's conversations. I'll begin with myself. I am Jeremy Neese, one of your hosts. My day job is with Retirement Evolutions, where we provide long-range wealth planning services, helping people to invest in what they value. I thank them for their support of this show and my volunteering efforts within Conscious Capitalism, where I am called to the slogan of elevating humanity through good business.
And I'm Sarah McCraren. I'm with McCraren Compliance, and we are a workplace safety training and consulting company specializing in MSHA, OSHA, and DOT. We are a purpose-based business, and we believe our purpose is to create communities where we all watch out for each other. So as far as our guests today, we have Danny Nee. Danny has 2 decades of experience in public and nonprofit sectors with a focus on community and economic development. In his current position as Executive Director of Community Investment Corp., a nonprofit, local and economic development organization and alternative lender, Danny launched a social impact lending program which incentivizes community-minded borrowers through preferred rates and terms. As a co-founder of Single Focus Web, a website development company he started with his wife Cecily, Danny also brings the perspective of an entrepreneur to his work. He is a graduate of Johns Hopkins University, where he captained the nationally ranked Division III men's basketball team. Woo woo! As sports fans, we can't let that go. He holds a master's degree in city and regional planning and business administration from Rutgers University and the University of Arizona, respectively. He was named one of Biz Tucson's 40 Under 40 in 2007 for his contributions to the profession and the community. Thank you so much for being with us, Danny.
Thanks for having me.
And we also have Kevin Cook. Kevin is one of the leaders of Technicians for Sustainability, which he helped co-found in 2003. TFS is a mission-driven company specializing in renewable energy and sustainable technologies for residential and commercial settings. TFS is a Tucson-based employee-owned cooperative that has also achieved the designation of being a certified B Corp. We'll tell you more about that in case you're not sure. And Kevin has a background as a neuroscientist and a mountaineer. Curious already. Kevin came to sustainability through his connection to nature. He believes in living symbiotically with his environment, which has led him to spend over 18 years in the renewable energy field. He is an NABCEP certified in photovoltaic, Although, he says he lives symbiotically, so he may feel like he can, take that on as a noun, a new pronoun, right? And he and his family live in a PV, solar hot water and gray water system. So he walks the talk, I guess, and fully. Yep. So thank you so much for being here, Kevin.
My pleasure.
So we'd like to get started with learning about you two as individuals before we dive into the big organization discussions. So, Danny, we would start with you. You want to give just the little dime tour, dollar tour, whatever you feel. We have an hour, so feel
Sure.
free. What led you to your vocational stance right now and some of the stops along the way?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Northern California, and my dad was a teacher, and I followed him into teaching straight out of college. And at some point, I always say it's the favorite job I ever had. I was a kindergarten teacher and a 7th grade, 8th grade English teacher. That eventually I wanted to have a bigger impact than just on the kids I saw every day, 5 classes of kids. And so I went into community development. And that is where I got my start in nonprofit. I worked in housing, in public housing in New Jersey for 4 years before moving to Tucson about 15 years ago now.
What brought you here?
I was actually got married at the time and moved out because my wife had a job. That was my first wife. She had a job here in Tucson, and that's why I came out. But it was also closer to my home in California. I have a brother who lives in San Diego.
And weather's slightly enhanced.
Yes, exactly. So it was, it's a little more of a chill place out here, a little more my vibe.
Nice.
And and so basically got into nonprofit, and then eventually as part of working in nonprofit, I think you quickly realize how important money actually is. It's an interesting sort of tension all the time. But, you can have all the passion in the world, but if you don't have the money to back that passion, you won't have the same impact. And that really got me into sort of management and the business side. And now I work at a local economic development organization that deals more specifically with money than I probably ever thought I would when I was a creative writing major at Johns Hopkins. So there you go.
Love it. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kevin, let's give you a chance to do the same. You want to give your thumbnail sketch for everyone, please?
Yeah, well, I got interested in the energy field when I was living in the greater New York City metropolitan area and just watching the massive consumption of energy, and sort of wondered, where does it all come from and how do we sustain this? And decided to move back to Tucson in order to try to find a way to live a little more sustainably than what I was seeing in that environment, and hopefully figure out how to share that with other people as well. So that sort of started me on my path, and I bumbled around at some nonprofits trying to find a home until I heard a gentleman from the Sacramento Municipal Utility District who was a U of A graduate who was starting the first that I know of anyway, utility grid-tied a program where customers of SMUD, Sacramento Municipal Utility District, could get solar on their home supported by the local utility. And he had come back to Tucson to give a talk. I heard that talk, and I said, okay, I think that's the solution that I'm looking for, where I could help people address the impacts of the energy use that they're having in these urban areas through a technological advance or adaptation. And so I spent the next few years trying to learn about that technology and how to implement it, and work with the utilities locally in sorting through all the rules and how do we interconnect with the grid and those sorts of things. And it's kind of broadened from there. It seems like every step I take just opens up other issues that we are looking to help make better.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. When you first came into this and you found the Sacramento team that kind of sparked the interest for you, was that rare? Were there other entities in Tucson doing that, or were you one of the pioneers in your...
There were a number of other companies that were installing solar systems at the time, but the vast majority of that work was for off-grid systems. So people on ranches or out in rural areas who needed power and
self-sustaining,
supplying the utility. It was just an economic thing that bringing a utility line a mile down the road just wasn't cost effective. And so even though solar was expensive at the time, that was a a circumstance where it would play out. And there wasn't a lot of work. Actually, after I decided this is what I wanted to do, I went to each of those companies and asked for a job, and everybody told me they didn't have enough work, to hire me on. It's possible they just didn't want me.
I'm sure that was it.
But whatever the case, none of them were really doing the grid tied portion, and so one of those companies told me, "Oh, you should go take a class at this organization called Solar Energy International in Colorado." I went and spent a month up there taking classes, and I came back and I met some people connected to that Sacramento program, and I ended up building a program from scratch to pull people together into a group purchase program and get some of the funds that the Sacramento program had tapped into applied to Tucson customers as well. And so my real entree into installing systems was implementing these 8 people who came together in a group buy for grid-tied systems back in 1999.
Wow, that's great. You were ahead of your time.
Yeah.
We appreciate you doing it.
I don't know why you keep calling it Sacramento when you have SMUD as an acronym.
Good point.
Because that's what I want. I want to start something called SMUD.
It's hard to pass up. Yeah.
Yeah, if you can actually bring that to life, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, just keep rolling with that and tell us how that's evolved into, who TFS is today.
Yeah. So in the early days, I worked on this program with the first 8 participants that I discussed. After that, I sort of as the word got out, we evolved the model to be an educational model. So at the time, solar installations were very expensive. The paybacks on these systems from an economic point of view were in the 20 year range. And we were trying to figure out how do we make this more viable. There were no incentives at the time. Later, the utilities started to provide incentives, but at the time, it was just the cost of these systems. And so I connected with several other people in the community, an activist and an educator, and we formed a nonprofit entity that hosted classes. We would teach about a variety of sustainable topics, but particularly about photovoltaics and solar energy. We would have a 2-day class where people would learn sort of the academic side of how to install systems, how to size systems, how they work. And then those same people would come into the field and work for a day or 2 days on an installation. And by doing that, people would actually pay me to pay the organization that paid me for the education. And the customer who wanted to get the solar installed on their house would only have to purchase the equipment that we continued to buy in bulk based on that initial experience we'd had. So I did that for 3 more years. And at some point, we started getting some momentum, and we were doing enough jobs that I needed staff, not just volunteers, to come in and install these systems. And I met a French electrician who was starting Technicians for Sustainability. He was very interested in sustainability, but his background was completely just in electrical installations, contracting. And so he and I were a good fit. I didn't have an electrical license. And so he and I paired up together in 2003. And that's kind of how things took off. That was the beginning of TFS.
And not long after that, if I remember correctly, because I met you when I worked as the deputy director at Habitat for Humanity. Mm-hmm. Kevin's company would come and they would train people out in the field up on a habitat house, and they would donate the system to us. And he did one a year for many years while I was there. So he's got his heart in the right place as well.
Cool.
Yeah. Are you still doing that?
No, we don't do that.
Yeah,
it's because I left, obviously.
Yeah,
I was the draw.
I was just curious. I'm like, now when I drive around, and if I'm in a habitat, neighborhood, I'm going to be looking because I'm like, I didn't know. I want to look for the solar panels on the habitat houses.
Yep.
Makes perfect sense to do it.
Danny, tell us more about Community Investment Corp. So you kind of touched on it a little bit in who you are and what you're doing, but tell us more, about the organization, I guess.
Sure. So Community Investment Corporation, or CIC, as we like to call it because it's a mouthful, is a 501c3. It's founded in 1996. We're a support organization of the Pima Industrial Development Authority. We were basically created by them as kind of basically the Pima Industrial Development Authority. Somebody they have a tax-exempt bond authority. And from those deals, basically there are resources, financial resources sort of thrown off from those deals, and they don't have any staff. So what they did is they created some nonprofits. There are three of us, Family Housing Resources, Southern Arizona Land Trust, and Community Investment Corporation. And we basically are a nonprofit that were seed funded by them, but now we earn most of our revenue. And we have three basic programs. One is doing bond compliance, because they're involved in bond compliance. That's not super sexy. It's very technical kind of work. We do help with charter schools in the area. They're often funded. Their facilities are funded through bond financing, and so we help them with compliance. Another thing that we do is we facilitate down payment assistance programs for home ownership. That meets my background, where I, out of housing, we facilitate the city and county home programs, Pima Tucson Home Buyer Solutions Program, which is a separate one. They all have sort of different qualifying requirements. And then also the mortgage credit certificate program. All three basically help with offsetting the cost of either down payment or home ownership. And then the last program that we've been more focused on is our small business lending portfolio. And we basically have roughly about $3.7 million portfolio. It's fairly small. If you as I think I said earlier, that's great if you personally have that, but for a bank or somebody else, that's not a very big portfolio. And we are really looking at more and more at the micro space. We're talking about loans $10,000 or below. One of the things we've been helping out with recently we're helping other nonprofits see when they potentially could increase their impact through lending. And people don't often associate nonprofits with lending, but if you think of a place like Habitat for Humanity, that's exactly their model. They build homes and they sell them for a reduced price, but the homeowners are paying back a mortgage. It's at 0% interest, which is, wonderful. It's a great savings for them, but it also creates resources for the nonprofit. And right now, one of the partnerships we have is with the Community Food Bank, and we are helping them with a food entrepreneur program. And in that case, they are looking to do more than just necessarily hand out food boxes. They're looking at food security. And so they're trying to help food entrepreneurs who are bringing healthy foods to our community. And they're very small loans, $5,000 and below. And basically what we do is we help underwrite those. A nonprofit like the Community Food Bank probably does not have the financial wherewithal or the infrastructure, the back office, the software that's needed. And so we help them originate, service those loans. We actually also pitch in half of the money, so it basically doubles what their investment is into it. And we're also helping budding entrepreneurs who want to try to start businesses. So those are some of the things that we're up to. We see our role as trying to provide access to capital to people who traditionally haven't been able to get it. That's why we're called an alternative lender. If somebody can qualify from a bank, we would send them over to a bank. But things like micro lending that's not a profitable space. Basically the idea is it takes as much time and energy to originate a $1,000 loan as it does a $100,000 loan or a $1 million loan. So it just doesn't make sense. We understand that, but we think there's a real need in the community for people to have access to capital to, I believe that innovation is being left on the table because you don't have to have a certain amount of money to have a great idea or a dream. And so if we are not providing some ways for people to potentially fund the startup of an idea, I do think we're leaving money on the table locally here in Tucson.
So you said, I mean, just so many, programs that fall under the umbrella. I feel like I'm talking like you now, but you as being Jeremy for listeners. But
if it's good, I'll take it. If it's bad, can we point it to Kevin?
So there, like about 5 times, I was like, going to wait for you to stop so I could ask more. But so with so many interesting things, I'm just going to ask, of all of those, which is kind of your, baby? So I'm sure the bond compliance is top on your list, but what's the second most exciting thing that you're doing? And then maybe I could ask you a little bit more about that one.
Sure. I mean, and the other programs are important in part because they create resources for us to do our community work. So there is that piece. I think the microlending and what we consider social impact lending, and the idea is we have come up with a definition of what we call enhanced community benefit. And what we're saying to the community is, if you're doing something that is good business but also good for the community, we want to invest in it, and we will give an incentivized better interest rate, better fees, things like that on traditional loan. That's, I think, what excites me, as well as the micro-lending space, where, again, you're helping people either start or expand their dreams. And just to throw out this idea, we spend a lot of time on celebrity CEOs, and we want to know what Mark Zuckerberg is up to and these types of things, and we think of innovation as people coming out of Harvard and coming up with this amazing idea that is a big sea change. And the reality is, I think that is overplayed in the media. 50% of GDP comes from small businesses nationwide. Small local businesses. A person who is a founder who is 40 years old is over 2 times as likely to succeed as a founder that's 25 years old. There are very obvious reasons for that, which include industry experience, relationships, life experience, those types of things. And so there are times that I think the venture capital, the shark tankification of of our sort of business world is not always productive. It's entertaining, but really, I feel like we should be spending more time focused on local people who are going to keep their resources locally. There's plenty of studies about the multiplier effects of local business, how they continue to recycle that money, spend on other local businesses, those types of things. So that's one of the things that gets me excited.
Yeah, I mean, and like, you're saying it's, I think I heard you say something about, figuring out how to fuel the dreams of, just about anything. But really what I'm hearing you say is, yes, of course, the, being able to prop up somebody and their individual dream, but it's really a bigger vision, because that individual dream is having a really big impact on our communities. And we would hate for those to not be fueled and, be stalled on the side of the road somewhere. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just are there any examples that you can point to, or are those kind of things that, for disclosure reasons?
No, we normally try to let our borrowers know that, how
about
that we're going to talk about them to help sort of, promote what we're doing. But, there's a small business, Pivot Produce, a guy named Eric Sanford. He's has been a cook, down at 5 Points. And
I love that place.
Yeah, it is a great place. Yeah. And so one of the things he's done is he's sort of become a middleman for local farmers and local restaurants. And so we gave him a loan through the Food Entrepreneur Program to get a vehicle so that he could basically be more efficient in linking local farmers with the local restaurants. Now, I think that has a big impact. That's a $5,000 loan. He's a great guy. I think he's still even working out his business model. It's not quite there yet, but we took a risk to invest in him. He's been a great person to work with. But That's something I'm proud of. Other people, and I get it. Downtown, a new hotel opens up, and the mayor is there, and there's a lot of fanfare. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be, but that's a pretty cool idea and a pretty good story about somebody who it's not just about how he's doing in his business, but it is actually helping our local community.
Yeah, exactly. And as a consumer, someone who is going to restaurants, I would really love to have more, locally sourced, items on my plate. So, I appreciate that. It's a good idea, but, thanks, because that's what I want to eat too.
Exactly. So, and I know that it's one of these things that I've actually talked to Kevin before about sometimes how do we finance the good things, and I know that you actually have some interesting ways that you help people to do that, because it is one of the unfortunate things. We don't all have cash to pay for everything that we need right then. So financing is important, and how do we do that in a way that's affordable, is not extractive of the consumer. And I'm putting you on the spot, but
I know, what is he talking about?
Do tell.
Yeah, we chat about this one time. We met and chatted about what he was doing, and he was doing such a great job, we couldn't even really help out.
Yeah, I mean, the typical stereotype about solar is, it's so expensive. And the truth is that the cost of solar has come down dramatically from those days when I was trying to get free labor to make it pencil out. It now does pencil out and is, well under half the price of what it used to be. But nevertheless, you still have to come up with a sizable initial investment. And the financing in many sectors of business, and certainly in many aspects of trying to implement sustainable technologies, and for sure in the solar industry, finance has been a real key place to leverage adoption. And this isn't just TFS, this is across the board. Many people are familiar with the Solar City story, where they really helped to expand this idea that you could lease a system and get solar essentially in a financed way through using your savings on your electric bill to pay for essentially the debt service. It was a lease payment in the case of Solar City. So we had our own versions of innovating products that we thought, when you get into the finance space, there are all kinds of characters. Many of them are not particularly interested in benefiting the community. They're savvy business folks looking to do well. And some of the practices we were seeing, we thought were not as favorable to consumers as we wanted them to be. So we really had two major efforts, and there's lots of little nuance. I've spent a lot of time on the finance side, but the two major efforts we had: first, we worked with several local credit unions, but we settled on one local credit union that we built out a loan program with that credit union. That when we first approached the credit unions, they were like, solar, I don't know, it's
risky.
It's risky. Where's my security? I don't want to go take these panels off somebody's roof. They didn't really comprehend the difference between giving somebody a loan that increases their debt to income ratio versus a loan that reduces their debt to income ratio, because it's taking.
It came with the funding source.
Exactly.
Yeah, with
by
the
reducing
reduced
their bill.
Electricity. Yeah.
So most lenders didn't look at that transfer of the utility payment to the debt service. And so we were able to work with this credit union and get a program off the ground that had that was transparent. Most of the solar financing out there has hidden fees associated with it. They typically, in order to make it a good sales proposition, they typically will reduce the interest rate. So they'll say, I have a 1.99% interest loan or a 2.99% loan. Well, there's no 2.99% loan. It's actually an 8% loan. But they've bought down, they have seller's points behind the scene. You don't see it. Customer signs a 2.99% loan, but they pay $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 more for the product in order to buy down that loan up front. So we worked with this credit union to have our loan transparent, have a low interest rate. It was, in the 6% range when it started, and it was just good terms for the customers. And as the credit union has matured with this loan product, they have come to feel that it is either the most or one of the most well-performing assets in their lending portfolio.
That's interesting.
And in turn, they've lowered the interest rate on it because they've realized,
the risk is lower.
You're bringing people who generally have higher credit than we usually lend to. They're paying their bills because they don't want to end up in default and paying more off their utility bills if their system gets shut down. So it's just worked out really well in terms of finding a local partner where we could build something that was more customer friendly and innovative. And then I think the product we were talking about is that nonprofit organizations that don't pay taxes, it doesn't make sense for them to purchase a system because they miss out on the federal tax credit, which is a big part of the incentives for solar. And again, there are lots of participants in that space. Most of them are looking for very high returns and come at it from a little bit different angle than we typically are coming at things. And so we've worked very hard to work with how do we find a financing partner that is willing to unpackage where all the risk is in these deals and let us take the risk where we feel that it's controlled for us and let them take the risk that's controlled for them and in turn end up with a more competitive product. And so we've done things where typically a financing partner for a nonprofit system owns the system and they're responsible for making sure that it is operating properly. Well, if we can provide them with guarantees that we're operating it properly, that's what we do. That's our business.
Makes sense.
We know what that costs, and so we can take that off their shoulders. We're willing to stand behind those systems. So what we typically did is took our profit margin on those jobs and put them on the tail end of the income stream from that financing. So it's a long-term decision on our part, but it reduces the riskiest part of the income stream that they're anticipating, and that helped to bring down our interest rates so that it was a more competitive offering for nonprofits in Tucson. So those are some of the things that we had talked about.
Yeah. And this is why I have a business crush on Kevin and his group. It's because honestly, I mean, the work that, he describes it very quickly, but the work that goes into that, I negotiate with banks and credit unions, like that is not a small amount. And to really do it to benefit your customer, I think is incredible. And I really do mean it. My wife and I, we actually have a TFS solar array on our house, and we, great. You guys have an amazing crew that works with you, and it was a wonderful experience. But I really, that's always been one of the things I've really appreciated about Kevin is that he's been willing to do the work to do something good. He doesn't take the easy way out just for profit's sake or ease sake, those types of things. So really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, it's about impact.
And a strong belief, like you're saying, impact, but in your product, you're like, I got to figure out how to get this to the people and to, to everybody, but also to the people who I think are also, doing really good, in what they're doing as well. So
it's interesting because we and I think we met again. We keep running into each other places.
It's the crush.
It is. Yeah. That's right. He doesn't realize it. I'm weirdly stalking him. But we with the 2030 district and Local First Arizona, the Scale Up project, and that is basically they were training businesses on conservation, and the idea is exactly what Kevin is talking about, where we are giving basically loans and grants, trying to incentivize them to put these conservation plans that they came up with through training into practice. And so, we're offering $10,000 loans at, 3 or 4%, and then we're giving $1,000 grant on top of it, because that idea is to invest in things that are good for our community. That is not profitable for us. We're a nonprofit, but it makes a lot of sense. And the reality is that you can underwrite against the savings, which is a great thing. You can look and say, okay, here are the things that you're going to do. It's going to reduce your utility bill by this much, and we can add that into, whatever ratios that we're using. And I think one of the things was we were doing smaller $10,000 ones. At some point, we have to figure out how to be able to do something for more to get solar involved to get the savings. And this is, I think, is one of the unfortunate things, is that it's that initial investment that often keeps us from doing things that are actually more beneficial in the long run, than just in the short term.
I agree.
So just FYI, we had the 2030 district and Local First on our podcast, and I did volunteer to offer up my building as the first, solar project.
All right.
Yeah.
We appreciate your sacrifice.
So, guinea pig us,
It does make me curious, though, Kevin. Are there growing segments right now? So we mentioned nonprofit has an interest in facilitating solar, and obviously commercial. We see it more and more parking lots and residential. Danny, and it's a good example. Is there a particular area that you see in more of a growth mode than others that leads to promise, or is it all sort of on an even trajectory right now?
Well, first of all, we call it the solar coaster. It's very difficult to predict where it's going. It seems like it's always changing. We've just had a very strong period of growth. I think things are continuing to grow for a variety of reasons. There are lots of different factors that are all sort of feeding into a dynamic that's, just changing all the time. But I think the big imperative is that more and more people are seeing that, there are real effects to climate change. They're feeling them directly, and there's a real sense out there, at least the people that we're talking to, that it's time to do something, and that maybe the notion that someone else is going to step in and fix this problem is remote at best, is I think the feeling on the street. And so I think that's driving a lot of interest. I think we've solidly moved out of the phase where people want to know how it works and whether it works into a phase of everyone has seen solar in a carport, on somebody's roof. They know somebody who's got it. There's enough systems out there that there's a level of trust. When I was first installing systems, people wanted to know whether this, they had a solar hot water heater back in the 80s that failed after 2 years, and they wanted to know, is this going to do the same thing? And now we're really past that and at a place that people believe it works. And it's a matter of how to finance it for them, whether their house is a good fit or their business is a good fit. So there is quite a bit of growth. I don't think it's limited to one sector or another right now. There's the utilities. Tucson Electric Power has voluntarily committed to upping their percentage coming from renewables to 30% by 2030. This is huge. They're required to do 15% by 2025. So the fact that utilities are on board and pushing it 30% is a big lift. To some of us, it doesn't feel like enough. We want 100%, right? But figuring out
take what you can get.
Well, yeah, 30's on the way to 100.
It's on the way to 100, and figuring out the technological challenges of moving from one stage to the next is something you have to do stepwise. So you've got the utilities doing it. You've got the parking structures you're seeing around town, on the schools, on businesses, nonprofits that we do a lot of work with. That sector is also growing, and resident. I mean, it's all growing. Residential customers are also enthusiastic, and there's good financing available for them, and so we still have a situation where if you don't have decent credit and you don't have the money, you're left out of the game, and that's true not just for solar. That's sort of that's a bigger issue that we are trying to address in some other interesting ways within our own business, but society-wide, we're facing that, and that applies to solar adoption as well. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm so curious. What are you guys thinking about? I mean, you're maybe still in the infancy, but as you develop that more, as far as how do you make it accessible for the people who don't have credit and don't have any money, and and then how do we replicate that to, like you say, to other sectors and where that's leaving people out. So it may be a conversation for another podcast or recording or even just lunch. But man, you got me intrigued for sure.
Well, there's no shortage of these big issues that we have to deal with.
For sure.
And
that's true.
And I don't think anybody has an answer to that issue. I think it's being worked out. There are people investing in it across the board. We think that our efforts towards employee ownership and the way that we've structured our company will help with that within our own company long term. But that's not enough to solve the problem in our entire community. That's just like one little spot.
So that was the next question. Tell me about, your employee ownership model or cooperative, right? Explain how that works.
Yeah. So in 2007, January of 2007, we converted to a worker-owned cooperative. And what had happened I was a neuroscientist, not a business major. I knew nothing about business. And what I observed as TFS grew was that our company has a significant need for capital. We might make a certain amount in profits in a given year, and we can't just hand that out to everybody the way, my understanding of some professional services companies like a law firm, at the end of the year, they just whatever is extra, they pay out to their shareholders and they start at zero every year. We're not in a position to do that. We have hundreds of thousands of dollars of vehicles that we have to purchase or own and operate. We have inventory that we have to buy and hold in order to get the best deals for customers, and not to slow down our operations. There's all kinds of capital requirements that I found that I had to retain capital in the company coming out of profits. When I started the company, I didn't have $1 million or $100,000 or actually really anything to put into covering those kinds of costs. So they've all come out of profits over the years. And at some point I realized that although the employees of our company were creating a tremendous amount of value that was turning into that value being our profits, we couldn't put their name on it because it had to stay in the company to fund the capital needs of the company. And in talking with lots of other businesses and getting exposure over time and reading a few books that heavily influenced me, I came upon the idea of employee ownership, where I now have a methodology to put employee owners' names on capital that has to stay in the company. And as employees, they're really largely creating the value that we deliver to the community. And because I can't pay that out, I can instead give them the opportunity to become an owner. And in their ownership, they have an internal capital account, is what we call it in the co-op world, where their name is on a chunk of the equity associated with the company. So that's kind of the broad stroke of it. We also, not everybody can become an owner. There are requirements for becoming an owner. Just because you're an employee doesn't make you an owner in our iteration of being a worker co-op. And so we also have a program that any employee can participate in that is a profit sharing program. So at the end of the year, we look at our profits and we will give employees the option to take it as a cash bonus or to double the amount of the award if they retain it in the company through the purchase of preferred stock in the company. So they're investors as opposed to voting owners. But that has been a way to help employees who may not be owners also retain some capital and increase the amount of the profits that they can put their name on at the end of the year. So we've really focused on those kinds of issues to help address the disparity between the value that employees create for a business and what they end up getting to put their name on.
Got it. Just thinking a lot. Yeah, I know.
So what have the results of that been for you? What are your takeaways by having taken that endeavor on?
Well, first, I would say that because we're so mission-driven as a company, we have always, from the start, been here to make renewable energy successful in Southern Arizona. That's what we're doing here. And when we hire employees, they're hired because to some extent of their alignment with that mission. So before we became employee owned, we already had a level of buy-in and investment from our staff. But I think it has helped to support a growing connection to our mission and to the business amongst employee owners. We started with 14 employee owners. We're now we're 17 right now, but we have several people have to go through a candidacy program and to learn how to be a good owner. It's really, I think, quite analogous to a business version of democracy. And so while you can do it without education, you don't end up getting the best results. Our hope is that we can provide enough education that people can exercise their sort of democratic responsibility with good information and help to steer the company in the right direction in the years to come. But we're delighted with it. We've had profitable years the last few years. People have nobody's gotten any cash out, but they've gotten their name on equity associated with the retained earnings in the company. So I think it's been quite successful. It's not easy to change from an organization that has a single owner, single leader to a democratic institution, and so we're learning as we go. We're a little over 2 years into it, and we still have some way to go to learn how to be good at it. But I think it's been a very positive experience.
And the feedback from the team is they favor it as opposed to life before. Anybody tell you that, boy, this democracy stuff's kind of tough. Can we just go back to command and control? You hear any of that?
I don't think we look at the world that way. There's not a whole lot of rear view mirror gazing in our company.
Good.
I mean, not that feedback isn't valuable, but I think for the most part, we're all trying to think every day of how we implement sort of continuous improvement and what aren't we doing well enough now that we can do better tomorrow. So I think most of our discussions are in that direction as opposed to, gosh, I wish we could just go back to not.
Yeah, it says how do we do it better? We're in it. Let's make it better.
Yes.
That's good.
Yes.
And democratizing capital, I think, is an important discussion. It's something that has more legs than it used to. That I don't know if that's now like a dirty term for some people because of all the movements towards privatization over time. But that idea of giving and I've been running into funds where there are sort of local loan funds that are being created where there's buy-in from community members, and then other people invest as well. But they are deciding, who there's a place, the Iwo Jima project out of Boston, but it's the local community people who are deciding where that money is going to be lent and who it's going to be invested in. I think some of those notions of ownership, democratizing ownership, some of the issues that we have with whether it's gentrification or otherwise are addressed because our society is basically, it's built around ownership. And so if we can find ways for more people to have an ownership stake, I mean, I think it's one of the things, here it is, conscious capitalism. So we're talking within that sort of framework. And, we were talking again before the show, just how Arizona is maybe a little bit behind on being able to support more cooperatives where businesses may want to do it, but it's not that easy to do.
Well, what it sort of is sparking for me, and I may not have fully formed a thought here, but you'll let me know. But so one of the things that is, that I personally, dislike about investing and, capitalism and the stock market is that it's just not what I think it should be. And it's not what I think it originally was. And that originally it was a way for anyone to invest their money into something that they believed in, so I want to be, I have money to invest. There's a group of people out here who want to bring some product or service, to the market, to the community. I like that service. I believe in it. I believe it can make money for me. I also, believe in what it's doing. And so that's how I'm going to choose where I put my money, and I'm going to leave it there because I'm not, trying to get a very quick return. It's not gambling where I happen to get lucky and choose the right stock and I get a really big return, right away. And then, who knows, you pull out and then all of a sudden it crashes and, I should stop before I, start unraveling even more. But instead, it's something that you want to invest in the long term, and you're truly an investor. You're in it for the long haul. You want your money to, continue to support that product, service, whatever, getting better and better. And so it seems like, although it isn't, public investing, and it is, I think, what the true spirit of it when it started.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. So just to jump on that, because we're working on something where we're trying to bring a crowdsourced option for equity investment, and on a micro scale. So we're unaccredited investors. People can invest as much as or as little as $100 into a company. There's a group out of San Francisco called WeFunder that we're talking to about trying to have basically a localized version of it. And I think it'd be really interesting to be able to put up local companies on a platform, and those people who want to invest locally, because right now the way we invest locally is we go spend our money at a place, and that's great. I think that's a great way to support your local businesses, buy local, those types of things. But this is a way to do exactly what you're talking about, which is to invest in our community and to do so in a more democratic way, because, up to this point, again, I think, my opinion is that the deck is a little bit stacked, where people have the, people with more money have a lot more opportunities. But this idea that somebody with as little as $100 could vote with that, with their money to invest in a place locally. Right now, there's no real ability or option to do that. It would be very hard to find those businesses, but to create a marketplace where we have that ability, I think is really interesting. And we're hoping to get something done by this fall when the 10 West Festival comes around. But whether or not we do, I do think the concept and the fact that we're even having the conversations is good movement. To break down some of what people are, I think, getting very disinterested in terms of what's going on, Wall Street and the way investments take place, and trying to again have more control over where our funds and where our investments go.
Yeah, I would say, some of these things, as far as social experiments, they take a little while to ferret out. Like, we can kind of point back to 80s, 90s timeframe, some of the things that were done in legislation and just sort of mindset. It sort of takes a while to figure things out. We can look back here now in hindsight and see that, the majority of the dollars have gone to the top 1%, and that we've got these institutions that are scaling everything to the top, right? We used to have 50 media outlets. Now we have like 5, and the top 5 banks own 2/3 or are in control of the 2/3 of the world's wealth. Like, these are staggering numbers that if we had looked at that on a chart and say, hey, this is where these decisions are going to lead us, we all probably would have said, boy, I don't think that's in our best interest. I think we need something different. So the idea that, okay, we've collected some information, we're heading on a bad trajectory, or at least we can improve our trajectory. I'll leave a judgment out. Solutions like what you're advancing, and from a financial perspective, we are seeing more and more options as investors to be able to go put your dollars in places that impact locally or impact more directly where you want to, rather than I'm hoping that by investing in a particular type of fund or category that it's going to truly hit sustainability. That's a hope. I can't see it. I can't measure it. We're seeing more things that if it's in your neighborhood, then I can tell that, those roads are getting fixed, or boy, that building has finally got its roof repaired, right? Those things become tangible if we keep it close and local. So what you're pursuing, I think, is fantastic, and we need to continue to bring those options to the table and bring awareness to them.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to have a discussion where there are 4 business people sitting around, and I don't think this is the typical discussion that you would have with 4 business people necessarily sitting around a table. You know, you'd hear a lot of Milton Friedman type of stuff and leave the market alone and those types of things. And I do think, unfortunately, it's gotten us to where we are a bit. We don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater necessarily, but that we do need to understand that we need a more inclusive economy than the one we have. And you know, I think personally, like I'm about equality of opportunity, not always of outcomes. Different things are going to happen. You know, you can't control all of that, but we should do our best to give everybody the same opportunities, and that includes to build wealth and to succeed. You know, to fulfill. You know, to aspire to do something like Kevin has done. Which again, I'm always just struck by the fact that you took your own ownership and basically broke it up to share it, and we're now even going through where they call it, I think, the silver tsunami. And what it is, it's a lot of business owners who are baby boomers they don't necessarily have people that they want to leave their companies to, and there's a movement to basically turn over companies to employees, and good for those people. Like I really applaud people who do that, because they have a broader view of you know, what an inclusive economy looks like.
Completely agree. We're running thin on time here. Was there anything else you gentlemen wanted to make sure we got an opportunity to speak to?
Yeah, anything that's just, you know, really important, even if it's some sort of you know, personal you know, something that's going on that you think it's important for us to know about or to share with our people?
I think to me, you know, the thing that drives how I have thought about technicians for sustainability is that businesses are an entrepreneur's chance to create a little piece of society. And so I've tried to build the society that I want to live in within my own company. And I think the more you talked about people retiring and passing their companies on to employees, you know, I would love to see people who are creating new businesses or who have businesses now put some of their entrepreneurial attention towards, well, what do they want society to look like, and how should their company look to manifest that. And I think that kind of consciousness around what you're doing and how you're forming your company ultimately would send us in a positive direction. It's certainly been positive for me in my experience with TFS, and I think people in the community appreciate it, and it makes me feel good that I'm creating something that I'm proud of and.
Well, you know, and I think it's nice that we look at you with admiration, and you know, I would say that I do as well. And yet, let's figure out how to normalize it, right? So it isn't, you know, we don't have to have the business crush or whatever we were calling it on you, because you're ultimately, you're one of a million, and and we have the crush because you're going out and doing the things that we all believe are the right things to do. So what's stopping us? What's stopping me? I'm definitely very curious about, you know, a cooperative ownership model for my own company. You know, at one point asked someone about employee ownership, and they're like, you know, on a different type of model, and they're like, well, you're not really big enough for that. Well, but you don't have to be big to do a cooperative, and it's in that democratizing and creating a holacracy, you know, type organization is what I want, and I haven't quite figured out how to do it well, but you have. So
Well, let's not say figured out, just to be clear. It is all a work in progress.
I didn't say it was perfect. Yes. It's all a work in progress.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
The one thing I would say is just to go back and to sort of reiterate, I hope that people can focus on the small as well as the big, and focus locally. Again, venture capital is something we spend a lot of time talking about. And just before we leave, last year, 79% of venture capital went to male-only founder teams. Only 2% went to female-only teams, and only 1% of venture capital went to African-American founders. And so, to me, that's not representative of the innovation and the talent that's out there. On micro levels, everybody can make a difference. You don't have to be a huge investor to be able to do that. And I'm hoping that there are things to come, and we can keep our focus locally. As when we're watching our portfolio and those things, we also think about what's going on in our own communities.
Well, thank you. I mean, those statistics are a bit shocking. It definitely isn't how you create the kind of world, that I want to live in. Probably not, that the rest of us do. So I'm already looking forward to, 6 or 12 months from now when we can bring you guys back again and find out what's going on, with the, equalizing access to solar and, what's going on with, crowdfunding local companies. So we can, hear about how that's advancing and how you guys are continuing to, help us, have the kind of societies that we want to live in. So thank you to you both for being here, and mark your calendars for, 6, 12 months from now.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, you guys, I'm so glad we have this recorded, because you articulated things that are sort of rattle in my brain without any cohesion, and you put good lyrics to the music in my mind. So thank you for that. You shared a lot of great things.